Welcome to episode 4 of the Bozi Breakdown. Tonight, we're digging into Kansas, and there is a lot to discuss. We're starts off with the truck race where we had a disqualification for the number 34 truck, but there was a lot of excitement in the cup race as well. We had a lot of incidents in the race, ranging from things like flat tires to clutch issues. But one of the cool things is that we also have a new pit stop record. So let's dig into it. We'll start off with the truck race since it was the first event chronologically. And the important thing to note there was that the number 34 truck got disqualified after the race, losing its second place finish. The rule that it was disqualified under was 14.4.9A.3. And what that rule covers is the truck bed. So I will pull up an image here from the rule book of the truck bed if you're watching on YouTube. And you can see here in yellow, the truck bed cover is what's highlighted in the rule book. And if we go to subsection 3 of that rule where the truck was disqualified, it says that bed cover material must be strong enough to prevent the cover from deflecting or sagging and must be sealed around the perimeter of all bed panels while the vehicle is in competition. So what that means, if you're watching here on YouTube, is that the yellow area that you see must be sealed to the edges of the bed cover. So if you imagine a pickup truck on the street, that empty area that you see is basically has to have a cover, what would be called like a tonneau cover on a street pickup truck. So in this instance, there was there was something that was deflecting, or there was an issue with the cover itself, which resulted in possibly an advantage for that truck. With that in mind, NASCAR disqualified the truck. So what we're looking at here is the likelihood that the team maybe used material that was thinner or may possibly of a different type that had some flexibility to it to allow air to be able to flow off of that bed cover in a way that was advantageous. This kind of translates to what we've seen in the past with cup cars with their rear glass. So in past years, we've seen rear glass that maybe gets a little bit deformed or gets a little wavy. And what that allows is for airflow to hit the spoiler in an advantageous manner to create more downforce. And on big tracks like Kansas, that can be a very, very big advantage. So here, my idea from the rule and from why they got disqualified is that they likely tweaked the bed to an extent where it could flex under load and push air over the spoiler to create additional downforce, which should result in additional speed. And if you watch the race, you can kind of see that truck being able to catch up at times, which is likely where some of that came in. So I have not heard or read yet if they're appealing that disqualification, but if there were gaps in the bed cover, that'll be kind of hard to appeal. So it stands to see what will come of that. Now that we have an idea what happened in the truck race, there were obviously some other things. We saw a broken pit gun for the number 11 crew, and unfortunately, that's actually not uncommon. I've witnessed that in person as well. That is because a lot of the truck and Xfinity teams still use some of the old customized clutch pit guns that were used in the Cup Series in years past. And a lot of them are modified or tweaked to the preference of the tire changer. So they try to use them for as long as possible. And typically, if you see a break like that, I would say most often it's just related to age and use. I know these wheel guns get serviced and the tire changers try to keep up with them. But in a lot of cases, from my understanding, is that the wheel guns are actually owned by the tire changers and maintained by them. So that's probably where some of that comes in. So it is very unfortunate, but not something that is extremely surprising. Let's get into the cup race. And I think one of the first things that we can dig into is the issues for the number 11 of Denny Hamlin. We saw fairly early on in the race that he started complaining about clutch issues. And with the Gen 7 car, the clutch master cylinder is actually located inside the car. So when you get into a situation like that, you're kind of stuck because there's not a whole lot that you can do. So the clutch master cylinder is what provides the hydraulic pressure through the throwout bearing, which is a piece that is inside the gearbox that moves the clutch back and forth. On the Xfinity car and the previous generation Cup car, that cylinder was mounted in the engine bay. So what you would have is you would have the clutch pedal inside the pedal box, but the actual master cylinder would be in the engine bay. And if you had to service that for some reason or refill it or bleed it, you could open the hood and access those hydraulics. The clutch pedal and master cylinder are part of a pedal box assembly that, just like a lot of stuff on the Gen 7 car, is a spec part. And in order to service that, you really have to take the pedal box apart. And in order to get to the pedal box itself, in a race, you would have to pull the driver out of the car. So that's not really a feasible option to repair the car when you run into a situation like that. So what the Joe Gibbs Racing crew decided to do is basically just to try to force the car into gear. Since they couldn't put it into neutral, what they could do is kind of try to get a running start for the car, and then have Denny rev it up and launch it to force the car into gear and to force it to take off. So let me see. I'm playing with images here, so I'm going to try to pull up an image of the pedal assembly so you have a visual. All right, so here's the pedal box assembly if you're watching on YouTube. On the left, we see the clutch pedal, brake pedal in the middle, and the accelerator on the right. If you look right below them, if you're watching on the video, you'll see 4 gold cylinders. So those are the master cylinder assemblies. So when you press the clutch pedal, that rod goes into the master cylinder, and that creates hydraulic pressure that then goes to that bearing that's in the throwout bearing that's in the case of the transaxle that allows the clutch to be able to allow the driver to put the car into a different gear or neutral or whatever action they may be wanting to do. Now, these gold cylinders are covered by a plate, and then the driver's feet sit on top of that. So in order to service that, you have to pull the driver out of the car, likely remove some of the padding that's down there around their knees, remove that plate, which has a bunch of bolts, and then you would be able to access that to service it. So it's really not feasible to service and race, which is why they skipped doing that. What they did decide to do is to just force it into gear. And that worked for a bit, but what eventually happened is forcing it into gear made the gearbox angry. So here I'm pulling the internals of the extract gearbox, and on the right side, if you're watching this video, you will see these straight cut gears that are inside of that extract transaxle. So these straight cut gears have these squared off teeth, and when you shift, there's a barrel that moves up and down in order to engage the different gears. What they were doing here, once that clutch was gone in the number 11, is basically forcing those gears to mesh together. And if we pull up a close-up of one of the gears here, I will show you why that is a bad idea. So those gears, without the clutch pedal, what you're doing is you're forcing these very squared off teeth to mesh together. But if you're forcing them to mesh there, you may not necessarily come up on empty spots. So the best way, that I can try to describe this for those that aren't watching the video is you're trying to put a round peg in a square hole to an effect, because you have these teeth that have grooves that need to match up. But if you don't have the clutch pedal to be able to shift the gearbox properly, you're basically mashing these gears until you forcefully hit it. And eventually what happens is if you try to hit these squared off gears against each other, you'll start to peel things off and you'll break stuff. So what ended up happening there that eventually caused the retirement is they likely stripped off a bunch of these teeth, so there was nothing left to engage, and they had to retire from the race. The root cause of that will be hard to say, but my guess is that there was some sort of hydraulic leak somewhere or something inside the transaxle that just broke or gave up. that would cause the clutch pedal to just fall to the floor and not be responsive. One of the other things I noticed with that number 11 pit crew is that they had an issue with the wheel nut during one of those stops where the front changer went to pull the wheel off and lost the wheel nut. Then he went to grab his spare one from his belt, and that went flying. So that was Austin Maloney. Fortunately, his jackman, Joel Buenon, had a spare on his belt, but he did not need to use it because one of the wheel nuts that flew out of Austin's hands ended up rolling towards Joel. He stuck it back on, and they were able to get the wheel and recover. So there's 2 points there that I wanna make. The first point is the reason stuff like that happens is typically because of the wheel nut being caught on the snout of the hub. So when a changer pulls a wheel off a car, what they're doing there is they're trying to pull everything kind of as an assembly. So the wheel nut socket made it to the wheel nut in the wheel. They're trying to pull it off completely straight from the hub itself to be able to set it to the side. But occasionally, depending on setup or other effects to the suspension, the wheel may kind of get tilted as coming off, and that'll result in the wheel nut catching on that snout because of the retention clips that are there, or some of the threads that are used for the wheel nut itself. And what that will do is that'll just cause that wheel nut to maybe get knocked off the socket. So if you're watching here on YouTube, you can see an illustration of the hub assembly, and you can see the snout sticking out, and then you see the wheel and the wheel nut, and then you see some of the retention mechanism there beside the wheel nut. So if everything goes perfectly, all of this comes off the hub snout directly in a very straight line. But if for some reason the wheel tilts, that wheel nut can get caught on any portion of that snout and send the wheel nut flying. So that's likely what happened there to cause that issue, but they recovered well. And one of the things I've noticed from those JGR pit crews is one of their smart moves that they have is not only do the tire changers have spare wheel nuts, the jackman also has a spare wheel nut. So what that means, that gives them multiple opportunities to fix this issue. And obviously, this took some time away from the pit stop, but because they were prepared, they were able to recover fairly quickly. On the other side of pit lane, we have a new record pit stop. So during the race at Kansas, the number 23 pit crew of Bubba Wallace at 2311 Racing set a new pit stop record of 8.09 seconds for a 4-tire change, which is just incredible, and now puts us less than a tenth of being in the 7-second range. I predicted earlier this year when I was on Actions Detrimental that we'd likely see a pit stop in the 7s. So this is slightly cool to be able to kind of confirm that teams are moving in that direction, and that we're now in the hundredths really until they get to the 7s. But that pit crew just got their front changer back. So Austin Dickey was out on medical leave for a few weeks. Hunter Masling filled in for him. He did a really good job. But this was the first race back for front tire changer Austin Dickey from being on medical leave. And you can see that they were firing on all cylinders and got some stuff done there. You have Adam Hartman, who's the rear changer. He's a veteran. And I don't want to call him old because I'm also kind of an old guy pit crew guy, but it is cool to see older pit crew guys that, he's in his 40s that are extremely fast and now setting the fastest ever pit stop done in the NASCAR Cup Series or in NASCAR at all, really. And then you have Nathan Ricketts on the jack. He was on the 45 last year. He's been moved to the 23 this year. Joe Crossan is the carrier, and Josh Peck is the fueler. So you have this extremely fast pit crew that's been able to accomplish this. And I see C-Wire Forum asking a question in the chat saying, did that stop include that jack swing maneuver that JGR has been using? And yes, it has included that jack swing maneuver, but that maneuver was actually invented by 2311. So this crew, the 23 crew, were one of the first ones to do it. So 2311, their pit department invented this move, and then JGR picked it up after them. So they've been able to kind of make that work really, really well. One of their coaches slash development jackman, Damian Jackson, is the one, from what I understand, that came up with the move. So they've been practicing it and they've been putting it into effect. But it's obviously worked out for them to be able to hit an 8.09 second for tire change, which puts them a tenth ahead of the number 77 crew, which held the previous record at 8.19 seconds. And then after that is the number 19 crew, I believe, at 8.22. So now we're just 900ths of a second away from seeing a pit stop in the 7-second range, which is incredible. And I will say that I will continue to stick by my prediction that we will see a 7-second pit stop before the end of this season. Let me pull up some stuff here, because I did ask to people to share some questions on Twitter yesterday, and I probably should have been better prepared with that. But I will pull it up shortly so I can answer those for you guys as well. While I'm looking for that, the reason this podcast is late is because I was out at Laguna Seca. The IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship was racing there. I was working on the number 14 Lexus. We're on the tire carrier. We had a decent-ish weekend. Nothing extremely exciting. We finished 7th, but I was very proud to see our teammates in the number 12 Lexus finish 2nd, and they had great pit stops, but they also just had a great start from Parker Thompson, who's one of the drivers in the number 12 Lexus. If you go to my Twitter, you'll see a video that I shared of Parker at the start, where he just fully sends it around the outside at the start and passes I don't know how many cars. It's hard to count, and that basically put him in position to have a great day. But Laguna Seca is awesome. I love Monterey. The town is great, so it was neat to be out there, and obviously always nice to get into to do some pit stops. All right, let's see. So here on Twitter, Matt Miles says, "I'd love to hear a mechanical diagnosis for the engine failure on the 16. Seems like we're getting a few early race failures on the 1.5s. So that was kind of an odd one. I know that AJ had some comments that weren't very optimal towards ECR that were heard on broadcast and have been shared on social media. But from my perspective, I'm not really sure what's happening there. I think that they're trying to optimize something, and maybe they're doing something to impact airflow to try to optimize aero that's choking the engine in some regard or causing some other issues. But that's really just a guess. The one thing that I can say after looking at some of these failures and comparing them to what ECR services, the teams that ECR services, I have not seen a failure for anybody outside of Colleague. So my thought is that their engineering department is doing something that's causing extra strain on these engines. So I can't say that there's something at ECR that I would consider that is at fault, but I think it's just they're trying some stuff, and maybe they've caused some restrictions or something else to those engines, and that's where the failure would stem from. That is my belief. So even though AJ may have been a little angry on the radio, I don't know that the blame is necessarily to be directed at ECR. LBHMS asks in the chat, do you think the stricter brake duct rules for the season have hurt the Toyotas at the intermediates? It feels like they've taken a step back while Hendrick and Penske have gone forward. It's tough, anytime there are changes, but I don't think that there's a significant change to the Toyotas, really. I think that it's more so that Hendrick and Penske have figured out how to optimize some of their stuff to kind of get up to that level. And I don't think it's also necessarily that the Toyotas have fallen back. One of the, kind of stronger leading cars at Kansas was the 11, and they had a clutch failure. And then you also had the 23, which had good speed, but also had a penalty at the beginning of the race that kind of mired them in traffic. And I think that's really where the big differences come from, is overall race management. I think that from an aero perspective, things are not hugely different. But where the differences come in is managing races and trying to put races together where you have all the components coming together. So I think Hendrick and Penske have started to get closer to JGR and 2311 on the intermediates, just with whatever they've been able to develop and research over the off season. But I don't think that there's that big of a gap. I think a lot of it just really comes down to race management. So let's see. All right, so we have NASCAR Soup says, can you explain the bits and pieces underneath the cup cars that get damaged when they get flats and are driven back to the pits, and what effect that has on the performance of the car? So that's actually a great question and segues well into our next topic, which is the flat tires. So let's start at the top by explaining what's in effect here. So if we look at the NASCAR Cup car, we see the diffuser strakes at the back of the car. These diffuser strakes sit perpendicular from the rear bumper, and they get air from the front of the car. So the goal for every Cup team is to get as much smooth air to those diffuser strakes as possible so that they can create as much downforce as possible. And the closer those strakes are to the ground, the more downforce that a car will create, which is why we often see cars driving around looking like they're nose up. If you're on YouTube, you can see an image here where this is from a couple of years ago, but this shows the same thing in effect of the number 11 car with its rear looking like it's sagging down and diffuser strakes looking like they're barely off the ground. And what that is doing is creating maximum downforce for the car. And the reason teams do that is because the Cup cars, Generation 7 Cup cars, rely more on the underbody versus the overbody for downforce. But in order to get there, they often have to work around some strict suspension rules that NASCAR has put in place. So NASCAR, for the shocks, has specific rules on length. So they externally measure the length on a jig before the race and seal the shocks, but they also limit the travel of the shocks internally. So if you're on YouTube, you can see at the top of the shock, there is a travel limiter. And what that basically does is it limits how much the shock can move internally so it can prevent the cars from bottoming out. So what teams have done, at certain tracks, especially 1.5s, is they will build their package for the car so that the car will often ride on those limiters in order to get that diffuser as low as possible to activate it to get maximum downforce. So that works out well when you have hot tires. But what happens often is if teams go out on cold tires with low pressures, you can create shocks to the tires while the sidewalls are flexed and damage them. So if you can imagine the car with the shocks not hitting the limiters, it's kind of like driving in your street car, but that's a big exaggeration. But once you get to the limiters, it's just like your street car hitting a huge pothole at speed. So if you ever had that feeling, that big bump, that's what happens. A similar feeling in the car, just magnified when they hit the limiters. So if a car goes out on track on cold tires, which means the pressures are low, what you have is the rubber on the sidewalls on the sides of the tires, instead of standing straight up and parallel to the wheel, it's actually bulging out. So then when you hit that limiter and hit a spot on track, the aluminum wheel will actually pinch the sidewall of the tire, which contains these steel belts that provide structure and can often bend or break those belts. And then as you start going around the track, now that those belts are damaged, what can happen is as the tires build pressure, the air pressure can actually burst those belts apart and burst through the side of the rubber. And then you have a tire that has an air leak. The reason that teams run tires at low pressures is kind of circular back to that diffuser. So once you reach a certain point with the shock limiter, you can't really go any further down to get the diffuser closer to the track. So what teams do is they'll run tire pressures lower than necessary or lower than what Goodyear or NASCAR want them to do in order to make the car overall lower and get the diffuser closer to the track. And their expectation is that once the car gets moving, the tires will heat up and raise. So those first handful of laps while the tires are getting up to temperature, they're really just hoping that temperature will build quickly enough so the pressures will rise and the sidewall becomes more parallel rather than bulging out. And that typically works for pit stops during stage breaks that are done under yellow, because the car will come in, they'll put tires on, and they'll drive around more gingerly at a slower pace while the brakes heat soak the wheel, which then heats up the tire, which then raises the pressure. The issues come if they change tires in something like an early practice session or in the race during a green flag pit stop. And what happens there is the tires will get put on and they may try to set them to the same pressure that they set them, to for the yellow flag cycle, but they'll have to go out on track immediately. So what that means now is they're going out with very low tire pressures with those sidewalls bulging out, but trying to get up to speed quickly. And as soon as they hit a spot on track where that limiter and the shock may bottom out, then you get this shock from the shock that goes through the wheel and through the tire, and you get that aluminum wheel just pummeling the sidewall of that tire and making those belts weaker. And in a lot of cases, like we saw with the 6 and the 24 and many others across the weekend, it'll kill the sidewall, and depending on how quickly you recover or how quickly it breaks, it can either send you into the wall or maybe you can try to get to pit lane. So that's basically the reasoning for all of that. Most of it, at least from my perspective, is often self-inflicted by trying to ride the edge to maximize downforce. And that's not something I would say that I would blame the teams on. They're trying their best to get the most downforce out of the car as possible to convert that to speed, but it comes with the risk. And we saw with the 24, it can come very quickly, and it came so quickly during the race that the pit crew was just basically winding down from their other pit stops, so they weren't really fully geared up. So we saw guys hopping over the wall and changing tires with their bare hands, and saw my dude Ryan Patton, who's the carrier on the 24, just bare-handing, carrying tires and pulling the discard tire off. And it's hard to explain to people how hot those things get, but even coming off the car, they're probably still 300 or 400 degrees. So he probably had to get some aloe vera or something in that regard once he got home to recover, because his palms are probably a little crisp. And I think some of the other guys came over without gloves too. And that's unfortunate when that happens, but it's still a heads up move, and you just kind of gotta get through what you gotta get through. Some people may say, well, why weren't they prepared or this or that? And most crew members try to stay prepared as much as possible, but in this situation, I think they weren't expecting a pit stop to come as quickly. And often after a pit stop, you may just pull your gloves off or whatever else just to wipe yourself down and to help prep or clean or do whatever you need to do with your gear, and then put the gloves back on when you're starting to get closer to your next pit stop, or maybe you want to go to the bathroom or whatever else. So some people may say, hey, what were these guys doing? But I can tell you from personal experience, it's happened to me in the past. There's just sometimes the timing just doesn't work out. I know in my experience of at least one incident I had at the Rolex 24 at Daytona, where we did a pit stop, and my personal policy is typically, if I need to go to the bathroom or do whatever else, is to wait it out until we're done with the pit stop, let the car do a lap or two, make sure everything's good, and then I'll go to the bathroom or get a snack or whatever else. Well, in this specific scenario, I went to the bathroom, and I'm in the bathroom, and I hear on my radio that I got a flat, I'm coming in. So I, zip myself up as quickly as possible, run out, and in that scenario, I grabbed my gloves. I got one of them on, and I think I couldn't find the other one, so I just hopped over, got the tire, and then got back over. Fortunately, it ended up working out, and we didn't have any big issues, but it's just sometimes the case. And, it's unfortunate that the 24 crew had to deal with that, but I think they did the best that they could in that scenario. Let's see here. Forrest Ward says, if you had complete autonomy, what do you believe it would take to fix the short tracks? It really hurts my heart seeing them struggle. So that's a very, very kind of wide question, and there's a lot of things that can be done. I know NASCAR has been trying, and Goodyear has been trying to improve it, and I think they've made some progress for it. And the easiest thing I can say offhand, which might not be the easiest solution, is just to give the cars more power. I think that, even trying to bump them up to 750 horsepower would probably change the racing a little bit. But I also like what they've tried with the option tires. I think, outside of, say, the championship race, I think it's a nice thing to try and use because it offers something different and offers some excitement. But outside of that, it's hard to say. You can make some aero changes, but there's only so much that you can do. The cars are just big. And even, I know people want to throw away the underbody, take all this off, do all that. But NASCAR has tested some of those options, and they don't really make that significant of a difference. And it's just the nature of this car being symmetrical and how the whole balance is completed. So I would say that the easiest thing to make short track racing better is just give them more power. I think that, that's the case. And obviously there's been discussions about the transaxle and some of these other things. And there might be some tweaks that you could do there, but there's really nothing significant enough as just throwing a little more power at it. I think Goodyear could probably go another step further with the tires, to soften them up or do something there just to bring out more wear. But they obviously want to approach that carefully because they don't want to cause issues, because you can go to a certain extent of how soft you want to go, but then you also can introduce secondary issues, as we saw with Denny Hamlin and some of the rubber that made into his throttle body. So when you go to softer tires, you can introduce rubber that gums up in places where you may not want it to gum up. And with the Gen 7 car having, the front fenders open from the wheel wells, that means that you could have stuff flying in there, which could block things or get things on fire. So there's a lot of variables to consider outside of just the construction of the tire itself. All right, let's see here. See if I got anything on the list. So I think that might be where we wrap up for tonight. This is a short one since I was obviously out racing, but I appreciate everybody sharing their questions. What I will do, I will go over to Apple Podcasts and look at some of the reviews, because I realized that you guys have been really cool and left me some reviews there. So what I'm going to try to start doing here is, if I can figure out how to pull this up properly, is to every episode to read some of the reviews and what people have shared. So we'll start at the beginning since I just discovered them. So Baker Skyline says, I'm really looking forward to all that you dive into on this podcast. As an engineer by trade and a huge NASCAR fan, I find your technical analysis very intriguing. Thank you, Baker Skyline, for that 5-star review. Let's go to another one here. Let's see what we got. Oh, there we go. We have Nicades. The 4-star review says, Bozi continues to impress and provide great insight. I appreciate that. Let's see, we got Bad Brad Lee. Only one episode out, and if you know Bozi's work, this is guaranteed to be a must listen every week. Appreciate that. Super Dave MC says, I've been following Bozi on X/Twitter for years. His ability to share technical information, plus that he supports with detailed drawings, is incredible. I'm so glad he is now going deeper into media with this broadcast. So there are 28 ratings on here already, which is kind of cool. So I'm very thankful for everybody that has commented. And if you are listening to this on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or whatever platform you have, I definitely appreciate any reviews, especially 5-star reviews that you can leave there, just to be to help the podcast grow and get some get some better rankings, and I will definitely try to read more of them in the future as they come in. So I've picked out a handful here, but as always, please leave reviews and ratings. You could even leave questions in there that I'll try to answer on future episodes, and try to dig into them whenever possible. And you can also leave comments on this YouTube video and leave comments on my Twitter. So I'll try to be a little more open of where I can accept those and what I can do with them, and see what we can figure out. All right, looks like we have another question here from LBHMS, which I've now figured out how to display on screen. So we're learning as we go along. What happened to groove tires, which was rumored in early 2023? I honestly don't think that was ever a strong consideration. I think they maybe did some simulation on it, but it's something that I think will be really hard to see in production, so to say. So I don't expect that we'll see groove tires anytime soon. I do appreciate everybody for tuning in. I will be watching the All-Star Race and the Pit Crew Challenge, so that'll be something fun to talk about next week. And we're still waiting on the penalty report for this week. So that if that comes out and we see something interesting there from the cars that they took back, we might have a small emergency episode before the All-Star Race. But until then, I will talk to you guys soon.